This is 24 in 42. Welcome to 24 and 42, season number 2. And our first guest I met as H R Laurence, but he's letting us in on a little secret that he's actually Harry. Welcome, Harry, to the show. We've never actually worked together, but I have read your material in magazines that I read, and I think I might actually be read by you, maybe.
I think so, yeah. No, thank you for having me, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So this is where we get to learn everything about you in 42 minutes. But first, I want you to tell us just a brief bit about yourself and what it is you actually write.
Yeah, sure. So I live in London. I work by day in the film industry, but I moonlight as H R Laurence, writing sword and sorcery and weird fiction, which is a kind of handy catch-all for a variety of different genres and different moods.
How long have you been writing? Well, let's wait till we get to our questions.
Okay.
Yeah. I did want to point out that you got an acceptance into Flame Tree Press, which is very cool.
Did, yes. Yeah, very excited about that one. That's a really cool TOC to be part of.
Has that title come out yet?
It has, yeah. It should be available from all good booksellers.
Okay.
It's an interesting one because it's folk horror. So my story is very much kind of in the sword and sorcery tradition. It's in a secondary world. It's got sort of magic and kind of supernatural characters involved, and depending on the reviewer, that's either like a refreshing change of pace or it just sticks out like a sore thumb in the context of the anthology. So it's interesting to see what side of that people fall on.
Exactly. I think it's very interesting that they've expanded because they've got a huge library going now, and they've opened up these themes to modern writers. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, it was a real delight to get in, actually, because I have to admit, like, although the story I think does have a lot in common with folk horror, because it's kind of very explicitly fantasy, sword and sorcery. I was a bit, it was a bit of a Hail Mary sending it to them, so I was really delighted that they took it.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
We'll see where that goes. I've been it's too large of a library to buy them all, but I've been picking up the ones that grab my interest.
They're nice additions too.
Yes. Oh yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah. All right, you ready for this?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
We're going to start this little timer over here, and for new guests, I give the author 16 of their 24 questions so that they have some answers prepared so we don't waste time thinking, because some of these are some thinkers. And here we go. Question number 1. What color do you write in?
Black, I'm afraid. Black on white. Very dull.
No splashes of red in there at all?
No. I'm completely monochrome.
All right. Well,
I let the prose be colourful, but the typeface is
there
awesome.
There you go. Pull us in that way. So how did you grow up? In the city, country, and when you're out there playing your adventures, I'm assuming you did. Did you have anybody you did it with, or were you a lone warrior?
A little bit of both, to both questions, really. So I grew up as a small child in North Yorkshire, in a village on the outskirts of the town. So it wasn't kind of properly rural, but it felt like quite a small community. And, we had quite a big garden which backed onto the local church graveyard. So we were always kind of playing around there. It was a great place to kind of go off and have adventures. And I did that. I've got 2 sisters and a brother. I played with them a lot. I played with a couple of close friends. We sort of would go off and construct these kind of worlds. I think I was probably maybe at times a little bit too bossy about, really nailing down the rules of the, of the whatever fantasy world we were off exploring in. But that was I remember doing that a lot until kind of computer games came along, really, and then gave me more of an excuse to be inside, which I look back on with a little bit of regret. You didn't know quite how idyllic he had it. And then when I was about 13, we moved down south to Peterborough, which is a kind of much more of a city, kind of modern, quite industrial, quite a different environment to be growing up in. And very, very flat. It's in the fens in
Huh.
England, so very kind of flat landscapes, big horizons. But coming from sort of North Yorkshire, which is kind of famous for sort of rolling moorland and lots of hills,
Right.
quite a big change. And going from sort of semi-rural to kind of the city, bit of a change, but. Seems to have stuck with it because I've ended up in London, which is obviously very much urban, and I've been there for 10 years now. So although my heart still feels kind of quite kind of countryside,
Sure.
realistically I'm a city boy now.
It is a different lifestyle. I can't. I've been
Yeah.
trying to wrap my head around growing up abutting a cemetery. That
Mm.
that probably led to some very interesting young age experiences.
Yeah, I mean, you just accept it as at that age. I think is what it is. And then when a bit older and people are like, oh, this is really creepy. Like, it's
Right.
just normal. It's just like it's
No
there. I
influence
see
on
it
you
every
at all.
day. Yeah.
So if you could follow the yellow brick road, would you?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think so. I'm a sucker for a nice kind of colourful bit of landscape.
Not knowing where it
Um,
ends.
well, yeah, I'm not sure. In Oz, what options do you have? Stay at Munchkin Land. I'm not sure.
Good point.
Not sure that's my speed really. So.
All right, here's an interesting one. When you write, does anything assail your ears?
Yeah, a lot. I was thinking about this question when I was younger. I used to play all sorts of things, kind of indie rock, folk stuff, singer-songwriters. Increasingly, like as I got a bit older, I found that I struggle with kind of discernible lyrics while I'm trying to write now.
Yep.
I'm much more now in kind of classical, jazz, ambient.
Okay.
Sometimes, like I do, sometimes with it depends a bit on, I have quite a broad musical taste. It depends a bit on the style I'm writing. I'll maybe try and kind of match up.
Right.
And I've kind of started getting into the more kind of like doomy metal for kind of some sorcery stuff. That's a good fit, and because I often can't work out what the vocalist is saying anyway.
Right.
The occult side it doesn't bother me much. But that can be quite good for kind of getting into a kind of trance state as well, because it's often quite repetitive and quite just kind of heavy riffs. And I think that does a good job of the assailing.
Yes, it does.
For the Blood and Thunder stuff.
I just
But
learned
yeah,
this pirate metal, and so the same thing.
yeah. I need to. I think I probably saw the same conversation on the Discord. Yeah,
That's
I need
quite
to dive into that.
Yep. Do you want to throw out one soundtrack or name that you're liking to listen to in your?
Actually, I mean, I just said kind of doomy metal. They're not really. They're in a kind of more sort of psychedelic kind of hard rock metal. But the OCs I've been
Okay.
listening to quite a lot recently while writing, and they're kind of, I know they're one of these insanely prolific bands. They've got dozens of albums, all kind of quite short and snappy. So it's good if I'm just trying to kind of get in a sort of quick burst
Sure.
of half an hour of writing.
Okay.
They I recommend.
Okay. Excellent. I like learning about new bands. I don't know them, so I will look them up.
I will send you the spelling.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. I have rearranged the questions a little bit, so we are
Yeah.
jumping into what were three of your favorite books as a
Oh.
child?
Okay, this is a really tough one because I was a really bookish kid, and
Okay.
so even thinking about this, there are so many that I could. Trying to kind of pick some titles that I think feed into the kind of stuff I write.
Okay.
The Red Wall series by Brian Jakes was massive for me as a kid. That was probably my first kind of introduction to sort of
Okay.
the kind of epic fantasy. Actually, I think I probably read that before I read Tolkien. Maybe I read the Narnia books before, but that was formative. I read like all of those. Then they're kind of graphic novels or comic books rather than books, but the Asterix and Obelix series. Which kind of is more my dad's generation, but he had a whole bunch that he and his brothers had of these. I don't know if they're well known in the States. They're quite well known in the UK and in Europe, but they're these sort of historical comedy adventure series about a pair of Gaulish warriors in
Okay.
Roman-occupied Gaul fighting back with the aid of a magic potion that gives them superhuman strength.
Huh.
And they're great fun. The English translations, I wasn't reading these in French, obviously, as a small kid, or now, frankly. But the English translations are kind of brilliant. They're full of these great puns and lots of wordplay. And I think that was something that really kind of at quite an
Okay.
early age. Um,
I'll have to
I
look
can see
those
my
up.
kind of my later love of sort of people like Fritz Lieber kind of starting
Start.
with those. The illustrations are all really fun as well. Um,
Can you
and then,
can you give me
mm,
the spelling of that? Is that
yeah,
T?
Asterix Nobelix, so
Nobelix.
Asterisk
Okay.
and Obelix, Obelix.
Okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing you right. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Um, and then a third one, a fantasy series that I read when I was probably a little a little bit older, kind of 13, 14. It was a series by Susan Cooper, The Dark is Rising,
Okay.
and particularly the book The Dark is Rising, and the first one in the series, Oversea Under Stone. They're really, they weren't books that I read obsessively the way that the others were, but they're ones that stuck with me,
Good.
and still they deal very much with kind of English folklore and English landscape,
Hmm.
and there's a real sense of place and of history and place being tied up, and history and
Okay.
place and folklore and figures like Khan the Hunter and Merlin kind of haunting these landscapes, which I mean, again, I think they were written in the 70s, but the sort of, contemporary children
Right.
protagonists are kind of dealing with. And they just have this wonderful sense of atmosphere and of mystery, and I think and of kind of inexplicable, kind of old, ancient magic. And I think
Cool.
that's something that really struck a chord with me, and again, kind of was a bit of a gateway into a style of writing that I've
Okay.
really loved ever since.
Obviously, she did it well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
That's cool. I've heard of those, but I have not read them. I will have to look those up.
If you asked me this question tomorrow, I'd have three different answers. I think, but those spring to mind.
They stuck. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm after. So all right. Here's a new one.
Hmm.
What was, or I'll even allow an is, your favorite cartoon, and when and where did you watch it?
Oh gosh. Okay. I guess cartoon is different from a comic book, so I've already said Asterix.
Yes, something that you
Oh,
watched on the telly or even a movie, I guess.
yeah. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I'm tempted. It's a bit of a basic answer. I'm tempted to go with The Simpsons, which was on at 6 o'clock every day. On first on BBC Two and then on Channel Four in the
Okay.
UK. And I used to kind of come home from school and watch it before I had my dinner, kind of, For there were a couple of years, so that was just like a ritual. Um, and it's one of those things that, like, kind of as an adult, I realized just how much of kind of popular 20th
Right.
century culture I first encountered
Yes.
in The Simpsons. Like, I genuinely think if you met someone who'd been living on Mars and you just wanted to introduce them to, you could do worse than just
Oh yeah.
just watch kind of series 1 to 9 of The Simpsons.
And their longevity and
It'll
their
set you up. And yeah,
consistency. Yes.
it ages well. The writing
Yep.
is really good. That springs to mind. I mean, a more fresh in my mind because there was just a new one released at Christmas, but the Wallace and Gromit claymation,
Okay.
again, very British. But that was like a bit of a family institution. I remember watching those as a really young child. I must have been tiny, and just thought that kind of the animation was funny. But again, as you watch as an adult, it's just charming. There's so much attention to
Right.
detail, and all of the
Yep.
little side gags. There you go.
Well, which one should we put down? Simpsons or
uh,
Wallace?
I think let's go for The Simpsons.
Okay.
Let's go
Very
with the
good.
first instance.
That's why I'm going with is too, because could still be watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think is the best thing you've ever spent money on in your writing career?
Yeah, I think fairly firmly like the I come up with ways to distract myself from the actual work of writing. So
Okay.
so I've tried to really discipline myself into you don't need anything. I can just do it, wherever I am. I do have like a nice mechanical keyboard that when I'm at home, that I like writing on. but like I've kind of tried to drill myself out of needing
Huh.
to be, if I'm in the mindset where it's like I have to be at my desk, I have to have my keyboard, I have to have everything set up, I have to have my
Yes.
cup of tea and my music on. That can be a very easy way of not seizing those kind of free 20 minutes
Right.
because I, will spend half my time getting into my mindset and I'm trying to be better at that. I also, I guess I'm a freelancer, so my work life is a bit erratic and that can sometimes be hard getting to a schedule, but realistically, sometimes I have just taken a day out because I'm like, I'm getting into a good place with this story. I really just want to try and finish this. And, I have the luxury and the privilege of, once in a while being able to do that. And I guess that, in a way is kind of a form of investing in my writing. And,
Yes.
and my time. So probably actually in monetary terms, it's the time taken out.
I like that aspect to this question. That's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being able to control that is very important too. That you don't need to be in an exact spot, exact chair. Just have everything right.
Yep. It's something I'm trying to get better at because I know that like I much prefer it when I'm in my spot and in my zone and I can just knuckle down for an extended period. But I'm also because because I'm freelance, sometimes my work is just really busy for patches. If I don't seize those little intervals, I just won't write anything for maybe weeks.
So that means you can write in public spaces with noise going on around you.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm trying to get better at that, but that's something I'm definitely consciously have been trying to drill into myself. Just seizing the moment and the time available.
Yep. No, I applaud that. All right. Do you think it makes your writing more difficult or easier if you feel emotions strongly?
I find it easier, definitely. But that's really when I get into a kind of flow state. Actually, is when I'm really feeling what the character is feeling, and because I'm not sitting there thinking, intellectually, what's the most interesting way to approach this scene? I guess they should respond like this to this. I'm like, oh my god, that thing is fucking terrifying.
Okay.
Or, I'm in love with this person, or I'm seeing this fight scene play out, or, this adventure is happening to me. That's when I can just get into a state and I'll look up and I've been in it for an hour and I've written, 1,000 words. Those are the moments that I find most wonderful.
So the inverse being, if you're not feeling it, it's more challenging and difficult.
It's more challenging. And again, you drill yourself to do it, but often those are the days where you're kind of like forcing yourself to hit a target rather than getting in it. And also, generally, I feel like there is a flip side. Sometimes when you're really thinking about something, you do that question of like, is this the most interesting way I can be approaching this scene, this story? Have I seen this a million times before? Is there something else I could do with it? Sometimes that helps you to get into a more exciting place because once you start saying, I haven't seen that before. Oh, that's a really good idea. That's a bit interesting. That's when I start getting excited and I start like, if I'm writing a character confronted by something horrifying, I'm just thinking, what's horrifying? Like, I don't know, giant spiders. I guess that's scary. Then I'm just going to be like regurgitating every other giant spider I've ever read about. If I come up with something that like is a bit unique and a bit weird, and something that actually scares me a little bit, then I'm going to start feeling an emotional connection to the scene.
Right.
And I'm going to start getting excited about it, and I'm going to go into that state.
That's
maybe,
a good idea.
Hopefully.
Tying it into maybe you've never run into a big spider before, but you've been scared before. So
right, yeah. So aspects of both, but definitely I feel like the aim is to get into that state of emotional connection.
Cool. Now we're getting into more specifically into your writing. So titles, where do they come for you, and are they a challenge or are they easy?
They normally come towards the end of the process. They're a bit of a challenge. I find I do drift towards prosaic titles, and there are certainly stories where I've kind of just called it something that kind of works. I even actually sometimes when I give a story a title kind of early, and then it's just stayed, and then I've kind of, even stories that have been published, I kind of looked at the title and I thought, actually, God, that's no longer like the best fit. Like it
Right.
kind of makes sense, but if
Yep.
I was, I just haven't, sometimes there are titles that just spring to mind. It does vary a bit. Sometimes, I mean, weirdly, like the two most recent works in process that I've begun have both had titles from the Bible.
Okay.
Phrases that have
Right.
stuck with me. Sometimes like a line of poetry or a lyric or something will strike you, and you'll just be like, that's great.
Yes.
That I can reverse engineer the story to fit.
Right.
And sometimes like sometimes it is a flash of inspiration. Like you've got a story that's almost finished, maybe, and then suddenly, oh god, it should be called this.
Yep.
I've got a story called the Torrent of Souls that recently was published in Old Moon, and that was one of those. I kind of it was just untitled, two robbing story, I think, and then I think I used that phrase at some point in rereading it while I was editing. I was just like, God, that's the title. Come
Right.
on, that obviously. But yeah, it is something I struggle with. I think a lot of my titles are kind of workmanlike. Could use a little more pizzazz.
I like that. Well, that Torrance one is a great title. I like that when you
Yeah,
hit
I
a
was
line you like and it
proud of
actually
that.
makes
Yeah.
sense as the title. I Speaking of what you said earlier about sometimes you wish you could take a title back. The one I've got coming out in Crimson Coil this month.
Mm.
It's a lame title now. I wish I could retitle it.
Oh, I won't judge the story. I
Okay.
promise.
I'm usually a lot more,
Yeah,
3-word titles, cool of a reference, and this was
yeah,
it was like a working title, and I never thought to go back and change it. So, oh well.
yeah. It
Anyway,
happens. It happens. Yeah.
about you. You're working on a project. What's your
Mm.
timeline like from initial idea, if it requires any
Mm.
research, to you say this is good, I'm submitting this.
This is completely random.
Okay.
Like honestly, I've had projects that have been in the process for years. I've had projects that I've written in a week.
Okay.
And I think it's something I just have to accept a little bit as part of the weird way that the writing
Right.
gods work. Sometimes, probably more generally, like often I will have ideas, that kind of get cobbled together out of lots of ideas. I'll have an
Right.
idea, I'll write it down, I'll make a note of it for maybe a cool image or a set piece or something. And then I'll maybe have an idea for a sort of plot or a story.
Okay.
And then maybe the character will occur to me, whether it's a new character or one I've written about before. I can see that person, having that
Right.
story, and then it might be like, oh, that set piece idea, for a fight in that location or
Right.
whatever. That image might sort of fit with that story. Gradually enough of these things come together that it starts to feel like there's a thing there, and then I might start sitting down and either if I have like often if I have like clear ideas for what the set pieces are, I'll just write those first and see if
Okay.
that and sometimes that will really give me a clear sense of the story, and I'll be like, yeah, obviously this is what needs to connect these things, this is how it
Okay.
begins. Sometimes I'll just be like, right, now what? And that might sit on the shelf for months before I come back to it and reread it, and
But then you can
something else
pluck it and
occurs.
put it in if it fits.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes they combine in different ways. I mean, the one longest I had a story, a Sword and Planet story, Hawks over Airless, it was called, in the Broadswords and Blasters
Okay.
anthology. Um, the first scene of that story had been, I wrote that at university. It had been like in a Word document on its own for 10 years.
I
And
like it.
I plucked it and I wrote the rest of the story, and it actually felt really good. Kind of
Right.
after so long, come
Yes.
back and I had to tweak it a little bit to fit the kind of, because I had no idea like of the world or the setting when I wrote it, but
Yeah.
basically, it was just this little vignette that I'd written suddenly became the anchor of something.
That's cool. That is really cool when it can come
Yeah,
back together like that. So when you're all finished writing for your day, are you exhausted, just need a good drink and a hot bath, or are you ready to rumble and get out?
it depends on like what state I was in. If I was like excited and riled up, I can be, yeah, let's go. if it's really been like, maybe an editing day where I've just had to kind of really just, cut down words or whatever, or just, make some changes, kill some darlings, that might just be the point where I'm just like a bit exhausted and
Yeah.
mentally out of it. I also, I do quite often write in the evenings, so sometimes, sometimes the kind of pouring a drink kind of, helps to,
Right.
to, kind of get the writing started rather than vice versa. But it's,
So would you live in any of the worlds you've created?
I live in the worlds, maybe. I don't think I've lived in any of my stories, but like
Oh,
the worlds I create, I think there are
Okay.
nice bits of them. They're some of them are quite scenic. There are sort of nice corners. I think the stories are full of kind of blood and guts and
Yeah.
man, and
That's
that
a
like.
really good distinction.
I mean, being realistic, I like having modern medicine and modern technologies and all this, but let's be honest, no one is really dying of dysentery in my stories or adventures, so I'm assuming the same logic applies to me in this, and in that case,
All right, I invite you to my monthly writing workshop, and I give you 30 seconds to give one bit of advice. What would it be?
I mean, this is such a cliche, and it's what everyone says, but it really would be, you've got to sit down and write at some point, because so often, like, I'll even with a fair bit of experience doing it, sometimes just the sitting down and doing it is the hardest thing, and I'll find reasons to procrastinate, or sometimes necessary, like, a bit of planning, a bit of figuring out what your goals are, if there are any upcoming calls I'm aiming for, a short story, that stuff that needs doing, but it's so easy for like the writing time to just turn into that, or the kind of, oh God, I've got to research this kind of tiny little detail about, Bronze Age metallurgy, and then, no, you don't. You could write the story, and then you could go away and like check if your details make sense.
Enough, right? Yep.
When you're close enough.
Otherwise, 5 weeks later, you're an expert.
You spent all of your writing time down a Wikipedia hole, and you probably come up with a dozen new ideas for stories as a result of that. But like, that's the other thing about your zipping back to an earlier question when you asked about timeline. Inevitably, if there is a story that I'm trying to get finished, that's when I'll have the flash of inspiration, and like there'll just be a fully formed story pop into my mind. It's like, no, I've got to go and write this. That's when the really quick ones come. It's when I'm focused on something else. But
have you ever had a character take over? You're writing one guy's story, and another character says, "Let's go tell this story."
Yeah. I mean. Maybe not to the point of like completely hijacking it, but certainly I've had a kind of, there's a story I wrote called Deserter's Bane, which was published in an anthology this past summer, which definitely began the antagonist kind of changed quite drastically. Partly because I kind of, written him as a very sort of, kind of almost like a Boris Vallejo or Franzetta, this kind of big ogre figure with the kind of tiger and slave girl at his feet, and kind of, and just kind of pure sort of pulp kind of cover. And then I was just sort of thinking, what is that guy actually like? What's that relationship? Like, what's he doing with his days? What's the more kind of, for this guy just to be a sort of physical threat, is the obvious kind of path, but actually, what if there's something kind of a bit more interesting and something a bit more kind of insecure and difficult under this kind of hyper macho kind of physical exterior, and that took the story to a way more interesting place than it would have been. Like the protagonist was still the same, the kind of basic plot was still the same, but the way it all played out changed completely once I'd started playing with that idea.
Giving a little bit more depth to that other guy.
Yeah.
All right. I like that. What is the most difficult thing you have ever written? Most personally challenging?
Yeah. It probably... There are things that are difficult to write because you're just not in the mood and you're not feeling it, and you maybe just need to kind of force out the words every day. I think on a personal level, there's a horror story I've written, a kind of cosmic horror, which hasn't been published yet. But I'm quite proud of it. I think it's quite good. But it's a kind of medieval, very religiously enthused horror, and it's written in the voice of this very disturbed character. Um, and it's funny, like there's nothing sort of particularly kind of graphic or explicit or disturbing in it, really. But I found like inhabiting that character's head, like hard. That was one where, you know, perhaps particularly because of the religious dimension and having had a kind of religious upbringing. There were kind of aspects of like that story where I was kind of really like, I don't feel comfortable kind of with some of the stuff I'm writing,
Sure.
some of the things I'm delving into, and like I don't really like being in this guy's head, but there's something in there that's interesting that has to come out. Like that hasn't been published yet, so I can't say for sure. It hasn't paid off,
but it sounds sort of like an Old Moon Quarterly-ish type story.
Maybe actually, that might be. Yeah.
I'm gonna take a shot at trying to get into them. So congratulations on getting into them because they have a very, to me, niche, angle.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I really like about that. I've read them since the first issue, and I was really thrilled to get in. But
Cool.
it's a niche, but it's also very diverse in really interesting ways.
Yeah.
Kind of from very fairly straight kind of weird sword and sorcery to kind of much more experimental. I mean, abstract stuff. It's really cool to see a publication just out there doing its own thing to that extent.
It is. I'm glad they're continuing. All right, here's another new question for you. This is choices. Instead of breakfast food, it's sports.
Oh, gosh, okay.
So listen closely. Would you rather go to the swimming pool or the shooting pool? Or
I didn't know you...
Swimming pool or shooting pool? Sorry.
I was going to say, I didn't know we had a shooting pool.
Yeah. I said that wrong. Swimming pool or shooting pool?
I mean, I've got to be honest, like living in the UK, there's not much of a kind of gun culture outside of the sort of grouse shooting, I guess.
Shooting pool.
So my shooting pool has
been...
Pool
and cue.
Oh, God, okay. Sorry, I
messed it up because I said it wrong from the beginning.
I completely got that right. Okay. So shooting pool. Yeah, shooting pool. Probably. I'm marginally better at pool than I am at swimming. That's not saying very much. It's also you normally do it in a pub, so that you get to counteract the kind of physical effort with beer. So yeah,
here's a little bit more. Are you an individual or a team? Tennis court or basketball court?
Oh God, I'm
neither.
I enjoy watching the tennis. So probably tennis, but I'm useless. I'm useless at anything involving hand-eye coordination. So.
And the last one, this will be a gun one. This is driving range or target range.
Okay. I mean, having said that, I've never played golf. I have played a fair few first-person shooters, so maybe I'd enjoy trying out the real thing.
Well, I mean, there's bow and arrow too. There's other types of target shooting.
True. Yeah. I did a little bit of archery as a kid, so yeah.
There we go. Threw you on the spot with that one.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite quote, and will you share it?
I considered going and looking up something really, really brainy that would make me sound great. I think if I'm completely honest, one of the other books that I absolutely loved as a kind of teenager was Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the kind of mantra in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is just the phrase, don't panic. Yep. And I used to, all through school and university, whenever I sat an exam, I used to write that at the top of my paper. So I think, maybe not my favourite quote, but the quote that I've put to the most use in kind of practical circumstances, I think would be just, and it's still whenever I'm in a situation that calls for it, so I always think of that.
Well, I appreciate the suck up to the 24 and 42 show.
Indeed, I did wonder.
All right, here's 10 single words for you. First thoughts.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Eels.
Pie.
Mediocre.
Man.
Pantheon.
Gods.
Anger.
Management.
Male.
Rage.
Tundra.
Arctic.
Feline.
Cat.
Mask.
Play.
Speech.
Bravo.
And fructose.
Intolerant.
Do you read nonfiction? And what do you enjoy reading if you do?
Yeah, I do. I read quite a lot of history. I guess like a lot of writers writing my kind of genre, it's a great source of inspiration. But also just, I think that's probably where a lot of my love for this kind of thing started was, the kind of historical side of it, loving history and the kind of stories that stem from that. One of my earliest memories, it's not reading, but is of a family trip when I must have been very young, younger than, maybe about 3. One of my very earliest memories was a family trip to Battle on the south coast of England, which is where William the Conqueror landed in 1066 and where the Battle of Hastings took place. And my dad telling me the story of the Norman invasion and 1066 and Harold and William, very, very vaguely. But that was kind of my introduction to a love of history. And I remember making my mum kind of get books, which must have been a bit too advanced for me, but about the Normans, about the kind of history out of the library for me. And I'm very vague, fleeting childhood memories of this, but that's kind of where it started. So I read a lot of history. I read quite a lot about film, about film arts, about photography. Quite a lot of books around that, but interviews. About kind of film practice. That's probably the other major area of non-fiction that is my main interest. But I'd like to read more, actually. It's something, one of my kind of resolutions to try and broaden my non-fiction reading of this.
Okay. Any titles you'd like to throw out as a favorite or a recommendation?
One that I read recently, bear with me a second.
Sure.
I couldn't remember the name of the author, but this book, Agents of Empire.
Okay.
I read recently, and that's terrific. That's about sort of 16th, 17th century Mediterranean, the conflict between the kind of the Ottoman Empire and Venice and the Italian city-states, the kind of marrying powers and the kind of vying for power in the Balkans. But it's all told through the lens of these two Albanian families who sort of are caught in the middle and have sort of over several generations, different members of these families are sort of on both sides of this conflict in all sorts of kind of diplomatic, military, espionage positions. Really, really fascinating kind of stories and a really interesting kind of part of history that I didn't know that much about. So that's one that recently I've really enjoyed.
That's good to know. I also work part-time at a bookstore, and so I'm actually using these as, so we have that book. I've seen the cover, but I haven't read it. So now I can act like I have.
Yeah, I definitely recommend.
All right, very cool. Excuse me. Do you have a visual artist whose artwork moves you? And it could be more than one. Just somebody that you're just like, oh.
Yeah, again, not winning any prizes for originality. Turner, I've always loved, and especially seeing those paintings in the flesh.
Cool.
I'm lucky to live in London, where there are lots of them. Kind of in the National Gallery, but something about. I know let's talk about kind of landscape and that love of landscape in literature earlier, but kind of always. Kind of going on long walks has always been one of my great joys. And I think that there's something in those paintings that captures that quality that like seeing a spectacular view gives you, where it kind of goes beyond just something that's pretty and aesthetically pleasing to something that kind of overpowers you a little bit, that's kind of awe-inspiring, that has this sort of And I love also the way he kind of pushes kind of into abstraction without quite being abstract. That
Okay. Yep.
there's always you can see what he's painting, but also it's obscured, it's blurred, it's experimental. It kind of feels like um, the flecks of paint on the canvas you can see being thrown out. That's
Sure.
something I've always found really moving.
Okay.
On a very different scale, I talked earlier about graphic novels and comic books. Hergé, who wrote the Tintin
Oh, yeah.
series, I'm kind of using him as a little bit of a catch-all, but I think that's the first time I remember reading the Tintin books, kind of as a kid, like reading a comic, which I've always enjoyed and really, really liked, but actually appreciating the art
Okay.
as opposed to the kind of just the
Right.
stories, and
Yep.
actually thinking like, wow, this is really cool to look at. I
Okay.
really love the way he's using the images to tell the
It is
story, and
different. Yeah. Yep.
that's something that's kind of again been a bit of a sort of gateway into a appreciation of that art form.
Right. That's
But
cool. That's a good
that's
reference.
yeah.
Okay. How do you go about giving depth to your characters? And do you
Mm.
treat primary, secondary, third level characters differently?
I think maybe it's partly because I work in film and obviously that's a very visual medium. But I think something that always I find really interesting is what a character notices and what they look at and what they focus on.
Okay.
Because that's different for every person. Whether they're
Sure.
looking at a person or a place, what are they noticing, and whether you're you know in an action scene, are you noticing like the way that your opponent is holding his sword, or are you noticing that he's frightened, that he's sweating, or are you noticing like what the surroundings about him that you might turn to your advantage are, each of those things might be a different lens into a different character,
That is cool.
and what a character doesn't notice also can also be
Right.
very telling,
Yeah.
and like
Yep.
you can use that for comic or tense effects. It's also something I really like as a trick because writing fantasy kind of world building is so important.
Right.
And if you can make the world building about what the character is noticing,
Sure.
I find it always feels more organic because it's not
Okay.
the author just telling you there's this and this and this. It's the character noticing that
Right.
there's this and there's this and there's this about a place or a landscape or whatever, and that so you build the kind of the character and the location together,
Yeah.
and they sort of feed into each other and influence each other, and that's something I try and use a lot.
I like that.
um,
All right.
I think it's a fun trick. And as for kind of tertiary characters, I think obviously there are always characters in a story who are just there to fill a purpose, and you're never going to flesh out as much.
Right.
I think I always try and find something that's maybe just a little bit different or a little bit. If there's a handle on, I never like it when you read a story. Pardon me. And I'm mostly talking about short stories here because that's kind of my medium.
Okay.
But when you read a story and it's just like feels like a video game in terms, and you've got kind of NPCs behaving a certain way because they're just programmed to do that,
Right.
and like, kind of like if you're the kind of poor city guardsman and you've just watched 8 of your mates get chopped up by this sword wielding barbarian, are you really going to just charge in?
Just right. Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
I think I'll be different. No,
This time
you're
will
going
be
to respond
different.
to that differently. It's or whatever, kind of, you're the tavern wench, like,
Right.
kind of, maybe you just had a really long day and you've kind of got a headache. And, like, this dude, who's kind of the hero of the story, swilling his ale is just kind of another customer to kind of get out of the way so you can clear up and go home. Like,
Right.
other ways you can just kind of give these stock characters a little bit of just something that makes them, even if they're filling exactly the function that they need to fill. Or like, are there ways that you can deploy them? So I've got another story that's an unpublished one, but where, as I was writing it, there's an early kind of fight scene, and I kind of made perfunctory reference that the hero kind of, breaks another character's nose, and that's it. That guy's out of the fight. We move on. And then it just kind of occurred to me, like, what if the guy who got his nose broken, just comes back, like, in another context? Like,
Right.
you meet him down the road, and it's kind of like, you no longer have any reason to be fighting. You just have this sort of slightly awkward encounter with this
Right.
guy who's, like, now dealing with the consequences of, having had his face smashed on a kind of Tuesday morning. And suddenly again, that's just something that, like, I felt enriched that story a little bit
Right.
and made both characters, like, a little bit more fleshed out and a
That's
little
what I
bit
was
more
just gonna
human.
say. Yep. Hey, I did you a disservice, by the way. I forgot to tell you when we were halfway through.
Oh no, I'm
So,
overrunning.
oh, we have 3 questions left, and we
Okay.
just hit 42 minutes. So,
Oh,
no
okay.
rush. No rush. We'll win the new long record. How's that? I want to hear these. These are important.
Okay.
So, which of your own characters would you like to hang out with as a close companion?
So I've got a character from a couple of stories that I've published, and a couple more that I'm working on. Captain AD, who's an 18th century Irish highwayman wandering around in historical Britain, but with all sorts of supernatural weird goings on. He's just a hugely fun character. Like, he's a kind of classic sort of pulp hero. Nominally he's a highwayman, but he kind of robs the rich and always does the right thing, and is always a great laugh to be around, and always, like, has a can-do spirit. And I'd like more of that energy in my life. I think he'd be
Okay.
great to hang out with.
Can you spell his name for me?
Yeah, AD, AIDEE,
Okay.
Captain, spelled the usual
All
way.
right. Gotcha. Yep, I got that. Cool.
Captain James AD.
That
So
sounds. That does sound. Although it could be a little bit of risky too at times.
well, yeah, I think all of my characters, there'd be a degree of risk hanging out with them. I think he at least wouldn't sell me out for profit. So.
Excellent. Very good reason to trust him. Yeah. In your reading, who do you think writes the characters you most enjoy? The ones you want to follow?
Um, quite a few I could mention. I mean,
Yeah, you can go ahead with a couple.
Fritz Lieber. I've
Okay.
always, again, in the kind of sort of sorcery fair, I've always just really loved hanging out with those characters.
Both of them.
Both of them, yeah. I mean, kind of for different reasons. They that's why it works so well. Like,
Sure.
you recognise different aspects of, you could even make it a kind of psychological thing. Am I a Mouser or a Fuffers, today? And,
Yep. Yep.
but yeah, kind of there. And even though, like, there are several of those stories that, like, objectively are pretty weak, but I just enjoy them. I just enjoy, like, his writing style, the way he kind of gives those characters their personality. Um, kind of like the previous answer, but they're just characters I can hang out with.
Right.
Um, that I enjoy hugely, and without being kind of like empty comfort. Like, there's a little bit of meat and a little bit of
Sure.
of interest to it, and it's not just sort of empty calories, as it were. But
I think he gives them quite a bit of individuality, but they complement each other well. But
absolutely,
even when
yeah,
they go their separate paths, he doesn't. They both get their fair shake.
yeah. That's a really nice aspect of those stories.
Anybody else you like grabbing?
Um, I mean, kind of for similar reasons. Raymond Chandler,
Okay.
the kind of the Philip Marlowe novels. Again, that's just a, again, I mean, it's really all about the prose and the kind of the narrative voice, that world weary, the kind of honourable prime guy. Like, it spawns a million imitators, but there's just something perfect about that formula and the way he does it. That's just huge fun to inhabit that world and that voice.
Those guys are. I would like to know them. I don't know if I'd hang out with them.
Maybe. Yeah.
So if you could write anybody else's character from any medium, who and why?
That's an interesting one. I think it's interesting because actually, kind of saying I enjoy as a writer is like sort of trying to find my own voice. So actually, like, in some ways, that's a hard question because when I'm, even though, like, I might really enjoy another writer's writing, often I wouldn't necessarily have a response to that of, like, oh, I wish I could write this character.
Okay.
It'd be more like, I wish you'd written, like, even more of this.
Right.
but I mean, I guess like this is a really weird one. There was a computer game I played years ago as a kid called Crimson Skies. I don't know if you ever
Okay,
came across
I've
that. It
heard
was
of it.
like kind of
Yep.
World War alternate era,
Right.
kind of 1930s. World War Two hasn't happened, but like it's kind of World War Two era, sort of aeroplanes in a kind of balkanized alternative America where it's all kind of different city states and you're sort of flying between them and you're sort of this ragtag crew of kind of charming mercenaries, and it's kind of like Indiana Jones meets kind of Biggles meets kind of pulp adventure.
I like
I
it.
always thought that would make like a fantastic film, like if you could get the rights, if you
Okay.
could,
Yeah.
I mean, hey, if any kind of executives listening to this,
Right.
I'd love to make a film of that. I feel like that could be just a really great fun indie style pulp adventure. So
That would
that's
be
an off the
cool.
wall answer for you.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. It'd be sort of like a Sahara. What was
Yeah,
that?
yeah, and some of that kind of Kurt
Yeah.
Cussler, yeah, kind of energy as well. Yes.
Cool. All right. And finally, sir,
hmm
are you trying to share anything in your writing?
Um, I think this is a tough one because again, I think like I'm trying to share a good story well told, like at the basic level. I think the telling well is kind of important. It sounds a little bit pretentious, maybe, but more than not thinking in terms of sort of imparting a moral or anything didactic, but if you're putting kind of care and craft into a story,
Right.
um, I've never liked the kind of it's just entertainment. It's
Yeah.
just sort of it's just a kind of genre thing. Even if it is kind of first and foremost, like I write fun adventure stories. Like I'm not pretending that I'm out there, solving the ills of the world, but I feel like kind of if you were just sort of hitting the kind of genre notes that you feel like your audience maybe wants and just hammering it out, then that's kind of a pity.
Right.
You're kind of wasting the potential. So I think that kind of there is a sort of strangely, this sounds so pretentious, but there is a kind of moral dimension to
Yeah.
taking care when you're writing. So like if there is a kind of broader meaning in what I'm trying to do, I guess it's that kind of trying to do it carefully, to think about these things, to think about the craft of what you're doing and do it well and kind of honour the sort of tradition that you're writing in.
I don't find any pretentiousness in
Whilst,
that at all. So
yeah,
I think that's very applaudable. And I think more people should, at the bare minimum, try to do that. Because
no,
there's good writers and there's good storytellers and there's bad of each. And I'll almost always take a bad storyteller over a bad writer.
yeah,
You know.
yeah, I would agree. I would agree completely. And I think, yeah, it's sometimes like writing in what's quite a pulpy kind of genre. Like you do sometimes get that kind of attitude of like, oh, it
Right.
just it shouldn't aspire to
Check
be
these
anything more than
marks and insurance cover.
exactly, and that always annoys me. It's like why not? Because then you're kind of just accepting like this sort of slightly false
Right.
dichotomy between like the
Yep.
literary and the genre. Um, and like, don't get me wrong, like I love both, and I read both, and I have a lot of time, and I think both can inform each other and learn from each other. But
True.
and there are meaningful separations there. But if you're just saying they can't they can't interact and they can't like have that kind of cross pollination, then that's a waste and that's a pity.
Yep.
You should take care in what you're writing, and it should mean something to you that
And
it's
find something
you
to
know
connect with, right?
yeah, like, and kind of idea, a bit morbid, but like, I do think, like, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, like, would I be proud of the last thing that I wrote? Hopefully, I've got many, many years to kind of,
Right.
look back and think, oh, that could have been better. But like, it's
And to be fair, neither of us are having to write for our food on our table.
no,
So,
well, no, absolutely,
but
absolutely, and that is an important qualification to make.
so, alrighty, sir. that will wrap
Yeah.
up our questions, and we hit 51 minutes.
Well, sorry, that's a bit more concise, but I had
Well,
fun.
I
So,
changed the order, and I wasn't sure if that was going to affect the time. I was getting really good on the last one. So,
let's blame it on the order.
yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So now is your opportunity to tell us three things. Something cold you'd like us to know about and pay attention to, something current, and something coming, however much you're willing to reveal.
Absolutely. Okay. So something cold. Got in Sun and Sorceries
All
by
right.
DMR Books. My story, The Barrow King's Bride, which is one of the stories featuring Captain AD, who I mentioned earlier. That was actually the first sword and sorcery story I ever had accepted.
Nice.
It wasn't the first published, but it has a special place in my heart.
Okay.
But it's also just one I'm really proud of. Actually, it's quite an old fashioned one. It's not doing anything. He's following a kind of old fashioned formula and kind of rip roaring adventure. But I was really proud of this. I felt it works really well. I
Cool.
like the dynamic of the characters. It's one I still feel stands up. So that's what I'm proud of. So for both those reasons.
And I've heard very much. I have not read that one. It's in my mega stack, but I have heard very good things about that anthology.
Well, yeah, no, it's a cracking anthology. I mean, this is the wrong time of year to promote it, obviously, because it's kind of Halloween themed. But we're still in the winter months. I think a little bit of spooky something could
Exactly.
get through to January.
Yep.
Something current, again, a story I've mentioned, but The Torrent of
Yep.
Souls in Old Moon Quarterly, that's my most recent published. Again, that's what I'm really proud of. I was very happy with how that came out. I'm really thrilled to be in that magazine and in that lineup.
Yep.
So that's one I'll plug. Available from all your favourite online retailers, as is the previous. Something kind of I've had a little bit of a dry patch with acceptances, so I don't have much on the horizon, but I do have. I don't know exactly when it's going to be, probably this summer sometime,
Okay.
but a story in Podcastle
Oh, nice.
called Fat Betty, which is not sword and sorcery. It was one of the first stories I ever had published, actually, years and years ago, under a different pen name.
Okay.
But it'll be published as H R Laurence in this one. And that's a kind of horror story about a heist gone wrong in a dystopian near future Yorkshire. So lots going on there. But it's the first of mine I've had turned into an audio production into a podcast. So I'm actually really excited to hear that.
Exactly. Cool.
So that's a really cool milestone, and yeah, looking forward to that.
They are definitely on my horizon to try and submit something that I find whatever's appropriate.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, I had a fair few rejections from them, so again, it was nice to get this in as a reprint.
Very cool. Well, Fat Betty's a cigar I smoke too, so.
Yeah, right.
Well, that has been spectacular. Thank you very much, Harry, for hanging out with us and letting us
Thank you, Jason.
get
It's
to
been an
know
absolute pleasure.
everything about you.
Had a blast. Thanks for sticking with me so long.
My thanks to Harry, not only for sharing his life, universe, and everything with 24 and 42, but for being the guinea pig of Season 2's revamp. All in all, we did pretty well, I think. Harry's Coming Soon has come, so I hope you go give it a listen. And you really must read his story in Old Moon Quarterly number 7. His opening sentence is one of the best I've read. I love it. Here's to you, Harry. I'm looking forward to reading more of your works. Remember, this was 24 and 42. Don't panic.